Hello everyone, this is Iran Talk, and in this video I'd like to take a look at the genetic history of Iran from the Iron Age to today. This will be a very comprehensive analysis as I will utilize the Global 25 to provide autosomal breakdowns as well as distances for the ancient samples we have to modern populations. Towards the end of my analysis, I will also present Neolithic breakdowns for contemporary Iranian populations. What will be evident from my analysis is that ancient and medieval Iranian populations will be very close genetically to modern-day Iranians. Thus, objectively, this video will seek to assess the relationship between the ancient Iranians and their medieval and modern Iranian descendants. Now, without further ado, I'd like to begin the analysis. Here is a map of the sites that have been sampled and for which samples have been sequenced from across Iran. I will begin my analysis by taking a look at the three Northwestern Iranian Iron Age sampled sites, which are Dinka Tepe, Haji Firuz Tepe, and Tepe Hassanlu. Then I will take a look at the sampled sites from the historic periods, particularly the site of Mersin Shal in Semnan from the Achaemenid period, the site of Lyre Songban in Gilan from the Parthian period, and finally the site of West Amin in Mazandaran from the Sassanian period. After this, I will take a look at the two medieval era samples, one of which is from the site of Ganj Dara in Kermanshah and the other one is from Kalmakari cave in Luristan. My analysis will also include a sample from the Yaz culture, which was the result of hybridization between the Andronovo culture and the Bimak civilization. This Iron Age sample from Turkmenistan is an early Iranian associated with the Western Aryans. Finally, my analysis will also take a look at the two sampled sites of Rabat and Sir-Karakat in contemporary Uzbekistan, and this will be reflective of a much later Iranic profile from Central Asia dating to the late Iron Age. Here are the Global 25 coordinates for the ancient and medieval samples that I have thus far discussed. These are the source populations that I will be utilizing for my analysis, and you can see that nearly all of these samples date to either the Mesolithic or the Neolithic, with the exception of the early Bronze Age Yamnayan sample set. As you can see, there's a Neolithic Iranian component from Ganj Dara, there's a Yamnayan Samara component from Russia from the early Bronze Age, there's a late Neolithic Anatolian farmer component, a Caucasian hunter-gatherer Kotias component from Georgia, a Paleolithic Levantine component from Israel, and this is actually from the Natufian culture, and then there's a Siberia Neolithic component from Devil's Cave in Russia, there's an Indian Mesolithic component, as well as a Morocco Ibero-Mauritian component, and finally an Ethiopian Sub-Saharan African component. Nearly all of these sources are from actual sampled and sequenced populations with the exception of the Indian Mesolithic component, which I have simulated. The reason for this is that South Asian Mesolithic hunter-gatherers have yet to be sequenced. Here are the autosomal results for the three sampled sites from northwestern Iran from the Iron Age, particularly Dinka Tepe, Haji Firuz Tepe, and Tepe Hassanlu. The sample size for each of these populations is listed at the end of the labels, and it is represented by the n equals denotation. The Iron Age Iranians are on average 34.7% Iran Ganj Dara Neolithic, 30.3% Turkey Barcine Late Neolithic, and this is the Anatolian farmer component, 16.6% Georgia Kotias or Caucasian hunter-gatherer, 9.5% Yamnayan Samara, so this is Indo-European ancestry, and finally 8.9% Natufian or Levantine Paleolithic. These results prove that genetically, the Northwestern Iron Age Iranian samples were of West Eurasian descent with no non-West Eurasian ancestry. These are the autosomal distances for the Dinka Tepe sample set in comparison to modern populations, and you can see that either all of these populations are Iranian from the country of Iran or they are Iranic speakers from outside of Iran, such as the Kurds of Turkey, and this is very interesting, and what this suggests is that modern day Iranians are genetically very close to the Dinka Tepe Iron Age sample set. Here are the distances for the one sample we have from the Haji Firuz site, and again you can see that Iranian populations as well as the Kurds are the closest, and this is very interesting, and this once again suggests a close relationship with the ancient Iranians from northwestern Iran and modern day populations from the region. Finally, here are the autosomal distances for the Hassanlu sample set in comparison to modern populations, and you can see that of the 25 populations listed here, 24 are of Kurdish origins. Thus, as is evident from the distances for the Haji Firuz sample set as well as the other sample sets from the Iron Age, the closest populations are Iranian, especially the Kurds, but also in certain cases such as with the Dinka Tepe sample set, the Persians of today. Here are the results for the Iron Age Central Asian Aryan samples, including the Yaz culture sample from Turkmenistan. These samples are on average 44.1% Yamnayan Samara, 27.1% Iranian Neolithic farmer, 21.5% Anatolian late Neolithic farmer, 2.5% Siberian, 1.9% Caucasian hunter-gatherer, 1.6% India Mesolithic, and finally 1.1% Natufian. Thus, what's evident from these results is that on a genetic level, the Iron Age Aryans had significant Yamnayan ancestry, but despite this, they also had significant Iranian farmer and Anatolian farmer ancestry with minor amounts of Siberian, Caucasian hunter-gatherer, Indian Mesolithic, as well as Natufian or Levantine ancestry. Here are the closest populations to the Yaz Aryan or Turkmenistan Iron Age sample, and you can see that the Yagnobis are the closest, which is very interesting, and after them you have many Caucasian populations, and their relatedness is primarily due to their steppe ancestry rather than direct descent. And then you can also see that the Pamiris are also on the list, which is interesting, as well as some isolated Tajik populations. In fact, the Yagnobis are an isolated Eastern Iranian tribe primarily descending from the Sogdians, and they've somehow managed to maintain the early Iranian genetic profile. Here are the distances for the Rabat Iron Age sample set, and you can see that the Yagnobis are yet again the closest. After them you have the Tajiks from Jawzjan and the Persians from Khorasan, followed by Caucasian, Iranian, as well as some Azeri and other Persian populations. Finally, here are the distances for the Iron Age sample we have from Sirkarakat from Uzbekistan as well. As you can see, the Pamiris are yet again the closest population, followed by Caucasian populations, and once again this is for the same reason that Caucasian populations cluster close to the Yaz culture sample as mentioned, and then you have an isolated Tajik from Jawzjan, followed by many Caucasian populations, the Pamiris from Rushan, as well as the Iranian Persians from Khorasan. Thus, what's evident from the distances for these ancient Aryan samples from Central Asia is that they're fairly close to isolated Iranian populations from Central Asia, as well as the steppe-shifted Iranian Khorasani and Caucasian populations. Moving on, here are the autosomal results for the Northern Iranian, Achaemenid, Parthian, and Sassanian era sample sets. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the Achaemenid period samples are from Mersin Shal and Samnan, the Parthian period samples are from Lyre, Songban, and Gilan, and finally the Sassanid era sample is from West Amin and Mazandaran. These three historic period sample sets are on average 53.2% Iranian Neolithic farmer, 22.2% Anatolia late Neolithic farmer, 17.6% Caucasian hunter-gatherer, 6.0% Yamnayan, and 1.0% Natufian. Thus, what's evident from these results is that on a genetic level, the ancient Achaemenid, Parthian, and Sassanian era Iranians were of West Eurasian descent with no non-West Eurasian ancestry. But not only that, the majority of their ancestry was West Asian in origin, and this is very interesting, and this suggests an autochthonous origin point for the ancient Northern Iranians. Here are the distances for the Achaemenid era Northern Iranian population, and you can see that the closest modern populations to them are the Mazandaranis, the Gilakis, as well as the Sangisaris from Samnan. After these three populations, you primarily have Persian populations as well as other closely related groups such as the Kurds and the Yazidis. But what's interesting here is that the distances are a bit greater compared to the Iron Age sample, and I reckon this is primarily due to ancient variation within the Iranian plateau and not really more admixture in contemporary Iranian populations compared to these samples. The distances for the Parthian era samples from northern Iran are very similar. Nonetheless, they are a bit lower. And again, you can see that nearly all of the populations here are Iranian populations or Iranics living outside of Iran. And this primarily suggests a great degree of continuity yet again between the Parthian period sample sets and modern day Iranian populations. Finally, the northern Iranian Sassanian era sample is very close to the Mazandaranis, Gilakis, and the Sangisaris, as was the case with the other two populations discussed from the Achaemenid and Parthian periods. But nonetheless, what's evident here is yet again the Kurds as well as Persian groups and some Iranics outside of Iran are very close to this sample, once again suggesting genetic continuity. Nonetheless, I must emphasize that these samples are a bit more distant from modern day Iranians in comparison to the Northwestern Iron Age Iranian samples from the sites of Dinka Tepe, Tepe Hasanlu, and Haji Firuz Tepe, and the reason for this is quite simple, and that is that these samples have more of an Iranian farmer shift, and this alongside their low Yamnayan ancestry pulls them away from modern day Iranian populations. Now I would like to discuss the genetic origins of the medieval era Iranians. The two medieval era samples we have from Ganj Dareh and Kalmakhari cave are on average 34.7% Anatolian Neolithic farmer, 34.3% Iran Neolithic farmer, 11.8% Yamnayan Samara, 11.5% Caucasian hunter-gatherer, 7.1% Natufian, and 0.6% Siberian. What these results suggest is that on a genetic level, the medieval Iranians are closer to the Iranians from the Iron Age from northwestern Iran as opposed to the Achaemenid, Parthian, and Sassanian era Iranians. I reckon that these differences are primarily due to regional variation, as the historic period Iranians are from northern Iran whereas these ones are from western Iran. Here are the modern autosomal distances for the Ganjdara historic sample. As you can see, the closest populations are the Persians from Tehran as well as the Kurds from Iran and Turkey. Moving on, here are the distances for the Kalmakhari cave sample from Luristan. Nearly all of the populations close to the Kalmakhari cave sample are Kurds, with the only exception being the Lurs. Thus, what is evident from the distances for both the Ganj Dareh as well as the Kalmakhari cave medieval sample sets is that they're very close to contemporary populations from the regions in which they were found. Before I conclude, I'd like to present the autosomal ancestral results for contemporary Iranians based on the same Neolithic calculator that was previously used in this analysis. To begin, the Persians of today are on average 34.9% Iranian Neolithic farmer, 28.6% Anatolian Neolithic farmer, 15.3% Yamnayan, 10.0% Caucasian hunter-gatherer, 6.8% Natufian, 2.6% India Mesolithic, and 1.6% East Asian. What's evident from these results is that the contemporary Persians are very close genetically to the Iron Age Iranian samples as well as the medieval era Iranian samples, though they do have elevated amounts of India Mesolithic and Siberian ancestry. Nonetheless, the India Mesolithic ancestry only averages out to 2.6% and the Siberian ancestry averages out to 1.6%. Thus, contemporary Iranians are 95.8% West Eurasian. Here are the autosomal results for the Kurds, and you can see that they're on average 33.9% Iranian Neolithic farmer, 31.8% Anatolian Neolithic farmer, 12.4% Yamnayan, 11.8% Caucasian hunter-gatherer, 7.6% Natufian or Paleolithic Levantine, 1.3% Siberian, and 1.1% India Mesolithic. Thus, the Kurds are very similar genetically to the Persians, though the only difference is that they have less Siberian as well as less India Mesolithic ancestry, and this means that they have more West Eurasian ancestry in comparison to the Persians of today. I reckon that because the Kurds have more West Eurasian ancestry than the Persians, they're closer to both the Haji Firuz as well as the Tepe Hassandu sample sets in comparison to the Persians. Moving on, here are the results for the Azerbaijanis from Iran, and you can see that they're on average 32.6% Anatolian Neolithic farmer, 26.5% Iranian Neolithic farmer, 15.2% Caucasian hunter-gatherer, 12.5% Yamnayan, 7.0% Natufian, 5.6% Siberian or East Asian, and 0.6% India Mesolithic. The Azerbaijanis seem to be very close genetically to the Persians and the Kurds, though nonetheless they have elevated Anatolian farmer, Caucasian hunter-gatherer, as well as East Asian or Siberian ancestry. Thus, the Azerbaijanis are also mostly of Iranian genetic origin. The Gilakis and Mazandaranis are the second to last Iranian populations that I will be taking a look at here. They're on average 41.9% Iranian Neolithic farmer, 30.5% Anatolian Neolithic farmer, 14.4% Caucasian hunter-gatherer, 9.8% Yamnayan, 2.3% Natufian, 0.8% India Mesolithic, and 0.3% East Asian or Siberian. Thus, what's evident from these results is that because of their isolation, the Gilakis and Mazandaranis have managed to retain more of that Iranian Neolithic ancestry, and also their non-West Eurasian ancestry is very minimal. Finally, here are the results for the Laks, the Lurs, and the Tats of Iran. These three populations are on average 37.1% Iranian Neolithic farmer, 32.9% Anatolian Neolithic farmer, 13.5% Caucasian hunter-gatherer, 9.2% Yamnayan, 5.3% Natufian, 1.5% Siberian or East Asian, and 0.5% India Mesolithic. Thus, even the Laks, Lurs, and Tats are very much genetically akin to other Iranian populations. To conclude, in this analysis I proved that the ancient, medieval, and modern Iranians belong to one genetic cluster and are actually very close to each other in terms of their overall genetic makeup. These conclusions were reached through my utilization of the Global 25 calculator, including the autosomal ancestry feature as well as the autosomal distances. In terms of the autosomal results, I utilized a Neolithic calculator to prove that the ancient as well as the medieval and modern Iranians are primarily of West Eurasian descent with minimal non-West Eurasian genetic contributions. Thus, per the latest available genetic evidence, the ancient, medieval, and modern Iranians are indeed closely related to one another. That is it for my analysis. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.